I still remember that night, just a few days before Christmas. The whole house smelled of cinnamon and butter as I pulled a tray of cookies out of the oven. I wanted to surprise my grandchildren, leave them a little box of warm treats on the kitchen table so they would wake up to something sweet in the morning. Carrying the tray down the hallway, I moved slowly, careful not to spill. That's when I heard voices drifting from the living room. I should have kept walking. I should have minded my own business. But there was something in my son's tone that made me stop in my tracks, frozen there in the dark. I leaned closer, just enough to hear. "The greatest Christmas gift," he whispered, "would be if Mom just disappeared from our lives." The words sliced through me like a shard of ice. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. The tray trembled in my hands, a few cookies sliding off and shattering on the hardwood floor. My son, my own flesh and blood, the boy I raised through sleepless nights and scraped knees, the man I helped build a home for, was speaking as though my very existence was a burden. And then came the sound that hurt even more. Claire, my daughter-in-law, didn't protest. She didn't gasp in shock. She only sighed, a weary little sound, and said something soft, almost dismissive, as though his words were nothing unusual. In that moment, I understood. To them, I wasn't family anymore. I was an obstacle, a name on the deed they wanted gone. I turned away slowly, swallowing the bitterness rising in my throat. The cookies were still warm in my hands, but inside I felt frozen solid. I walked back to my bedroom, each step heavier than the last, as though I were sinking into the floor. I set the tray down on the dresser and sat at the edge of the bed, letting the silence wrap around me. No tears came. Not yet. Only one question echoed inside me, over and over. If my own son wished me gone, what place was left for me in this house? I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, watching the snow drift quietly onto the street outside. Strings of Christmas lights blinked cheerfully from the houses across the way, glowing reds and greens that mocked the emptiness inside me. This was supposed to be a season of joy, of togetherness. Instead, it became the night I realized I was no longer welcome in the very home I had sacrificed to build. When morning finally came, I was still sitting in that chair by the window, my eyes raw from staring out at nothing. The snow had stopped, leaving a soft white blanket across the street. Families were starting their days, neighbors shoveling driveways, children tossing snowballs on their way to school. Their laughter floated up through the cold air, and for a moment, I envied the simplicity of their joy. Inside my chest, there was only a heaviness I couldn't shake. I tried to act normal at breakfast. My grandchildren came bounding down the stairs, faces bright, voices high. They hugged me, kissed my cheek, reached for the cookies I had carefully packed into a tin. Their little hands and sticky smiles reminded me why I had sacrificed so much in the first place. I wanted them to grow up with stability, with a safe home, with the kind of warmth I never had as a child. Ethan sat at the table scrolling on his phone, barely looking at me. Claire poured coffee without a word, her face tight, her movements sharp. The conversation between them from last night still echoed in my ears, louder than anything they said that morning. I smiled for the children's sake, but behind the smile I was unraveling. After they left for school, I retreated to my room and pulled out the thick manila folder where I kept every document tied to this house. I spread them across the bed, the purchase agreement, the bank statements, the deed. My name stared back at me in black ink. 40% ownership. Ethan and Claire never bothered to remove it. Maybe they thought it didn't matter, that I would never use it. They forgot one thing. I had built my life on paying attention to the fine print. I remembered the day Ethan told me about the house. His eyes had lit up. his voice full of excitement. He said it was perfect for the kids, close to a good school district, a backyard big enough for a swing set. He just needed help with the down payment. I didn't hesitate. I wired $120,000 from my savings, the money your father and I had put aside for our retirement dreams. Dreams we never got to share because cancer stole him too soon. Ethan promised me I would always have a place here. This will be your home, too. Mom, he said. I believed him. But now, looking at the stack of overdue mortgage statements, the overdraft notices on the joint account, I realized what my place had become. I was no longer a partner in their dream. I was their safety net, their silent ATM. My contributions had turned into expectations. Still, I wasn't ready to explode or accuse. I needed clarity, not chaos. I gathered the papers back into the folder and slid it under the bed. That night, I called an old friend, Robert Holloway, a lawyer I'd known since our teaching days. He had once told me, half joking, that every woman should keep a plan B. Just in case life tries to corner you, he'd said. I thought of his words now, my hand trembling as I dialed his number. When his familiar voice came through, calm and steady, I finally let myself exhale. Robert, I whispered, I think it's time I take you up on that plan B. Robert didn't sound surprised when I explained what had happened. He listened quietly, only interrupting to ask a question now and then, his tone calm but deliberate. When I told him the exact words I had overheard, he paused for a long moment, then said, You need to protect yourself, Margaret. You still have rights. Don't let guilt or sentiment blind you to that. His words steadied me. For so many years, I had put my son's needs before my own. Even after he married Claire, even after they started their family, I was still the one bailing them out when money ran tight. At first, I convinced myself it was what mothers did, but now I could see the truth. Help had turned into dependency, and gratitude had withered into resentment. Robert reminded me that because my name was still on the deed, I had legal leverage. I could demand they buy out my share or force a sale of the property. It sounded harsh, almost unthinkable, but the more I considered it, the more I realized it might be my only way forward. The next day, I decided to test the waters. At dinner, while the kids argued over who got the bigger slice of lasagna, I asked Ethan if he had caught up on the mortgage payments. The way he froze, fork halfway to his mouth, told me everything I needed to know. Claire jumped in, her tone defensive. We're working on it, she said quickly. It's just a temporary setback. Things will stabilize soon. But I could see the truth in the unopened mail stacked by the door, envelopes stamped in red. Final notice. My stomach clenched. They weren't stabilizing anything. They were drowning, and they were counting on me to keep them afloat. That night, after everyone went to bed, I crept back into the kitchen and opened the joint bank account on my laptop. My heart sank as I scrolled through the transactions. Groceries, gas, yes, but also takeout, new gadgets, charges from online boutiques, little luxuries piled on top of the necessities. They were living as if someone would always be there to cover the shortfall, that someone had always been me. I felt a slow burn rise inside me, not of anger, but of resolve. If they thought I was invisible, they were about to learn how visible I could be. The following afternoon, I made an appointment at Robert's office. His shelves were lined with law books, but his desk was neat, only a single lamp glowing against the winter gray outside. I handed him the manila folder I'd pulled from under my bed. He flipped through the documents, nodding. You have a solid case, he said. We'll draft a notice of intent to sell or compel buyout. It will force their hand. They can either refinance and buy you out, or the house goes on the market. The words landed heavy, but also strangely liberating. For the first time in years, I felt like I was taking back control of my life. When I returned home, Claire was in the living room, surrounded by shopping bags. Ethan was sprawled on the couch, eyes glazed from another marathon of video games. Neither of them asked where I'd been. Neither noticed the quiet steel settling inside me. Upstairs, I sat down at my desk and began writing in my journal. Tonight, I wrote, I stopped being the background character in my own life. Tonight, I remembered I have power, and I intend to use it. The official letter arrived 2 days before Christmas Eve. Robert had drafted it carefully, every line polite but firm, the kind of language that left no room for misinterpretation. Notice of intent to sell or compel buyout. I read the words over and over, steadying myself for what they would mean once Ethan and Claire saw them. I slipped the envelope onto the kitchen counter where they couldn't miss it. Hours later, when I returned from a walk through the snowy neighborhood, I found Ethan standing by the counter, the letter open in his hands. His face was pale, his jaw tight. Claire hovered behind him, her expression flickering between anger and disbelief. What is this? Ethan demanded, his voice shaking. It's a reminder, I answered quietly. My name is still on the deed. I've carried this family longer than I should have. It's time you take responsibility. Claire's cheeks flushed. You can't just pull the rug out from under us. Not right before Christmas. Do you have any idea what this will do to the kids? I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. I know exactly what it will do. It will teach them that adults honor their commitments, and that love doesn't mean endless handouts. Ethan's shoulders sagged, but then he stiffened again, his temper flaring. So this is your plan? To punish us? To humiliate me in front of my own children? I almost laughed, though the sound would have been bitter. No, Ethan, this isn't punishment. It's boundaries. There's a difference. He stormed off, slamming the door behind him. Claire stayed behind, her eyes sharp with calculation. You'll regret this, she said coldly, then gathered the kids' coats and hustled them out of the house. That night, the silence in the house was louder than any argument. I sat in the living room, with the lights off, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, waiting for the weight of guilt to crush me. But instead of guilt, I felt a strange calm, like stepping onto solid ground after drifting too long at sea. The calm didn't last. By the following evening, the electricity was cut. I knew it was coming. I'd already stopped covering the unpaid bills, but the timing was brutal. The entire house went dark, just as the children were hanging stockings by the fireplace. Their startled cries pierced me, yet I forced myself not to move, not to pick up the phone and fix it like I always had. Candles flickered in the corners, casting long shadows on the walls. Claire paced the kitchen, her voice sharp as she dialed customer service, pleading for an extension. Ethan sat on the stairs with his head in his hands, muttering curses under his breath. The kids huddled close to me, frightened, and I held them tight, my heart breaking, but deep down I knew this was the only way they would ever see the consequences of their choices. If I swooped in to save the day again, nothing would change. Later that night, after the children had finally cried themselves to sleep, Ethan confronted me in the dark hallway. His voice was raw, almost desperate. You're tearing this family apart, Mom. I looked at him steadily, my voice quiet but unshakable. No, Ethan, I gave you what you said you wanted. You told Claire the greatest gift would be if I disappeared. Consider this my way of honoring your wish." He froze, his mouth opening, then closing again. For the first time, he had no words. Christmas Eve arrived with a weight I had never felt before. The house was unusually quiet that morning. The children tried to keep their excitement alive, running through the halls in their pajamas, but the adults moved like shadows. Ethan avoided my eyes, his jaw clenched tight. Claire busied herself with meaningless tasks, rearranging ornaments, wiping a counter that was already clean. By afternoon, the tension had thickened into something you could almost touch. The letter from Robert still sat on the kitchen counter, now creased and smudged from too many hands gripping it too tightly. Every time Ethan passed by, his gaze would flick to it, as though it were a live wire ready to shock him. As evening fell, the house grew colder, literally colder. Without me covering the bills, the heat had been turned down to a whisper. I sat with the children near the fireplace, reading them a story by candlelight. Their small faces glowed in the flicker, eyes wide as they listened, unaware of the storm brewing just beyond the circle of light. Then the lights cut out altogether. The room dropped into darkness, and the children cried out in alarm. The power company had finally followed through on its warnings. Claire rushed to her phone, dialing frantically, her voice sharp and panicked. Ethan cursed under his breath, slamming his fist against the wall. The kids clung to me, trembling. I held them close, whispering that it was okay, that sometimes even on Christmas Eve things don't go as planned. But inside, my heart was splitting in two. I hated seeing them scared. Yet I also knew this was the consequence of choices Ethan and Claire had made, choices I could no longer shield them from. Later that night, after the children had been coaxed into bed with promises that Santa could find them even in the dark, Ethan confronted me in the hallway. His face was half lit by the glow of a single candle, eyes hollow, shoulders slumped. "You've destroyed everything," he said, his voice raw. "You're tearing this family apart." I steadied my breath, feeling the tremor in my chest but refusing to let it show. "No," I said softly, "I'm not the one destroying anything. I've been the one holding it together for years. You're only feeling the weight now because I've stopped carrying it for you." His lips curled, ready with another accusation, but I didn't give him the chance. "You once told Claire," I continued, my voice steady though my heart pounded, "that the greatest Christmas gift would be if I disappeared. Those were your words. Ethan, so tonight, I gave you exactly that. I stepped out of the role you wished away." For a moment, he froze, caught off guard. His mouth opened, then shut again. There was nothing left for him to say. The silence that stretched between us was louder than any argument we had ever had. Claire appeared behind him then, arms crossed, her expression cold. She looked at me as if I were a stranger, someone who had overstayed her welcome. In her eyes, I read blame, resentment, and something else, fear. She understood what the letter truly meant. She knew the house, their fragile version of stability, was slipping from her grasp. I turned and walked past them without another word. Upstairs, I packed a small suitcase, folded neatly, no rush. I placed a sealed envelope on the dresser where I knew the children would eventually find it. Inside was a letter, just for them. Words of love they could hold on to when I was no longer under this roof. As I zipped the suitcase shut, I felt the sting of tears for the first time. Not for the house, not for the possessions, but for the years I had spent believing that sacrifice was the same as love. Tonight, I finally understood the difference. Christmas morning dawned gray and silent. The children tore into their stockings with what little light streamed through the frosted windows, but even their joy couldn't fill the heavy air. The house was colder than I'd ever felt it. Claire fussed in the kitchen, trying to stretch a meager breakfast into something festive, while Ethan sulked in the living room, avoiding both me and the unopened letter that still sat on the counter. I sat quietly, sipping a cup of coffee gone lukewarm, watching the scene with a detached kind of clarity. The decision had already been made. There was no going back, not after the words I'd heard, not after the years of silent sacrifice that had eroded into expectation. The following week passed in a blur of paperwork. Robert handled everything with steady professionalism. He explained each step clearly. The house would be listed unless Ethan and Claire could secure financing to buy me out. They tried. I'll give them that. But the numbers didn't add up. The late payments, the debt, the unstable income. It was all stacked against them. In the end, there was only one option. The house went on the market. I expected rage, screaming matches, slammed doors. But instead, Ethan grew quiet. Too quiet. He walked through the rooms with vacant eyes, as if the walls themselves had betrayed him. Claire grew sharper, her words barbed, aimed at me but bouncing back at her husband, too. The children sensed the shift, their questions innocent but piercing. Why are people coming to look at our house? Are we moving? I answered gently, never placing blame, only reminding them that home wasn't just walls and furniture. It was love, stability, the people who cared for you. I prayed they would hold on to those words longer than they remembered the arguments echoing down the hallways. When the sale finally closed, the check was divided. My portion was transferred into an account solely in my name. For the first time in decades, I felt what true independence was like, not just financial, but emotional. I wasn't tied down by invisible strings of guilt or obligation anymore. On moving day, I stood in the driveway with my suitcase. Ethan lingered by the porch steps, his shoulders hunched. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. I almost reached out, almost touched his arm, but stopped myself. Some silences needed to remain unbroken. Claire didn't come out to say goodbye. The children did, though, running into my arms, clutching me tightly, their small voices begging me not to go too far. I kissed their hair, whispered promises of visits, and slipped the little letter into their hands, folded carefully for them to read when they were older. I climbed into the cab waiting at the curb. As the driver pulled away, I didn't look back at the house. Instead, I focused on the road ahead, on the city skyline rising in the distance. Weeks later, I found myself in New Orleans, a city I had always dreamed of visiting, but never dared to on my own. The music, the food, the colors. It was as if life itself was reminding me that beauty still existed, even after heartbreak. My old friend had a spare room, and for the first time in years, I woke each morning without the weight of someone else's choices pressing down on me. I sat one evening on a balcony overlooking the French Quarter, the sound of jazz floating through the air. The night was warm, the sky painted in shades of deep blue. I opened my journal and wrote. I didn't disappear. I didn't vanish like he wished I would. I chose to step away, to reclaim my life, and that, in its own way, is the greatest gift I've ever given myself. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.